As a person who finds himself living in the EU postmodernist caliphate, I'm always questioning at what point did the nation state consciously cross the line into something of a subconscious existence. More disturbing, however, as a right-winger, is I also have to accept that maybe I, or the absence of an I, probably played a role in this development. As discussed in other videos, it is clear that my basic values find themselves well outside the flanks of the Overton window, and I frantically try to source the person, place or thing that allowed this to happen. Margaret Thatcher was the last true Conservative in the last 40 years. Personally, in a British context, I would rank her achievement of reprivatising the British economy against enormous odds on par with Churchill's leadership during the Second World War. If anyone thinks that social justice warriors are a new phenomenon, then you are sorely mistaken, as they pale in comparison to the shop stewards, union reps and members' actions during the winter of discontent. While grave diggers, factory workers and coal miners struck for 3-day working weeks, the ever-changing government went cap in hand to the IMF for yet another bailout. It was the modern equivalent of Greece and soon to be Venezuela if left to continue. Enter the butcher's daughter, who had studied the failure of every previous government's ability to solve this issue, probably under candlelight since there was electricity for only 3 days of every week. To be fair to her contemporaries, she had the luxury of hindsight regarding the failed policies of previous Conservative cabinets, and so was able to correctly calculate the known quantity of her political rivals. Also, at this time, she, unlike her predecessors, were becoming increasingly aware of the intentions of a future industrial superpower to the east. It wasn't that Thatcher was outstanding politically, it was that she understood the art of sacrifice and decided from a very early stage that the price for killing, not compromising with, the Labour Party was British heavy industry. And make no mistake, Labour was the goal, industry was the price. This form of political genocide had not been witnessed by the British establishment before, and although it was very successful, it was the left's equally sinister and successful backlash from this that the right has been experiencing ever since, but more on that in a moment. At this time, the Anglosphere was doing all the heavy lifting regarding the free world, and the American dream had yet to be exhausted. This dream included something of an insular view that in order to be part of the First World, as it was known then, one had to be a democratic, secular society. People could be forgiven for holding this belief, as although their nearest rival at this time could be accurately be described as industrialized, the average Soviet citizen was unable to dine on steak every evening. Also, the amount of people defecting from the East to the West suggested the same. However, Reagan and Thatcher's bean counters were becoming increasingly aware of the emergence of China, who seemed to be bucking this trend. Moreover, as the British industry declined, the former industrial giants sought to reinvest in other economies, effectively becoming British-based financial service providers to the emerging markets, which beautifully complemented Thatcher's goal of upgrading to a knowledge service-based economy in order to compete in the brave new emerging world. The true Brit or American was redefined as resourceful, adaptable and enterprising, but above all global in their outlook. Although this political economic philosophy known as Thatcherism or Reaganism became very successful, it was still subject to the law of opposites, and this came in the form of New Labour. Redesigned from the ground up, finally, it could rival Thatcherism's global aspirations and no longer depended on unions for funding, so therefore no longer answered to the call of the national working class. It has been nearly 15 years since it's been in power, and the world has changed a lot. Blair can now borrow at 1/4 the interest rate Thatcher could to fund the Falklands War. And this is exactly what he did to gain power and then stay in power. But nobody on the left had forgotten Thatcher's treachery, and when they finally gained the reins of power, they practiced their own form of political genocide by way of mass immigration, where they sought to breed the white voter out of existence, not because they hate white people, but due to democratic voting patterns. It was deemed an unacceptable sacrifice to be made to kill the Conservative Party, something they learned from Thatcher. Whatever one's views on Blair, it was an astonishing achievement to reinvent the Labour Party and make it into a credible alternative to the rampant capitalism of that time. More incredible, however, was the lengths to which he was willing to go to achieve this, as now both main political parties were willing to sacrifice the indigenous working class on the altar of globalism. It is no coincidence that financial sector's growth correlates with the industrial decline of Britain and America, as massive amounts of capital were diversified away from the American and British industry and pumped into China from the mid-70s onwards. Example: General Motors' financial wing makes more money than its automotive sector, so it could be better described as a financial institution that invests predominantly in the global automotive industry. Bottom line is, it is a good bank that builds bad cars. The fact that General Motors and other corporations will invest more money in undemocratic, authorial governments than they will in a democratic, liberal one suggests they have more confidence in the former. Moreover, although it is true to some degree that China seeks the American dream, it is also true that the West seeks to become more authorial. Thatcherism was so successful it forced the Labour Party to the centre-right. But New Labour, through its demographics is destiny immigration policy, then dragged the Conservative Party centre-left. Because more people chose to sink rather than swim in Thatcherism, they fall out of the working class and into a welfare-dependent underclass, ripe for the left-wing hate preachers. This is the situation on the front line. Back at high command, the elites have thrown in the towel on free market private capitalism, and both sides seek planned economy, state capitalism. And this is the thing. Contrary to popular belief, the West's left and conservatives seek to model themselves on the Chinese economy. It is the poster boy of the Eurocrats and the US Democratic Party, warts and all. These elites and wannabes are more than happy to relinquish their freedoms because they are well rewarded in return. However, the person at ground zero increasingly finds their freedom is the only thing they have left to trade with. We find ourselves 40 years later in the same place Thatcher did, where the left's unsustainable policies threaten the freedoms and social fabric of a nation. But I don't think we should despair, as we have a victorious, bloodless, historical account to refer to. If the right want to protect their freedoms and that of the next 2 generations, then the unconditional deconstruction of the welfare state is the sacrifice we have to make to slay the thing, simply because it is the thing.